So the Magic got a look at two potential playoff opponents, and there's a little bit left to be desired. So who do the Magic want to face? Who do the Magic want to avoid? It's time to think about playoff matchups on today's episode of Locked On Magic.
You are Locked On Magic, your daily Orlando Magic podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And you are indeed Locked On Magic. Today is March 12th, 2024. My name is Philip Rossman-Reich. I'm the expert and site editor over at OrlandoMagicDaily.com. Of course, follow me on Twitter at PhilipRR_OMD. On today's episode of Locked On Magic, now that the Magic have faced two potential playoff opponents and come up short, let's think a little bit about who the Magic might actually want to face in the playoffs if they can control such things. What kind of matchups favor the Magic and which ones they should avoid or try to avoid coming up here in just a moment. But first, we want to thank you again for making Locked On Magic part of your day every day, no matter when you listen to us, whether it's first thing in the morning, whether it's right when we upload. We truly appreciate you making Locked On Magic part of your day every day. Remember, there's a great Locked On podcast covering every single team in the NBA. Just search for Locked On and the team you're looking for, the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Magic is brought to you by Nissan. Are you the kind of driver who likes to push things a little further? Ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner? Well, take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Check them all out today at nissanusa.com. Okay, we've had 24 plus hours to kind of decompress. Maintenance day for the Magic. We'll get to some of some things that they did on their off day that I was able to check out later on in the show. I just want to highlight a few things there. But maintenance day, Magic back at practice Tuesday, back to work Wednesday against the Brooklyn Nets. We will not see another playoff opponent until the New Orleans Pelicans come to town a week from Thursday. So Magic are going to get a chance to reset themselves, figure some things out before the opponents get tougher. Not that Brooklyn's not tough, not that Toronto's not tough, not that Charlotte just lost to Detroit, so maybe they're not so tough anymore. But the Magic could get a chance to reset themselves, figure some things out before they get tested again. But obviously, we put a lot of stock into the two games this weekend against both the New York Knicks and the Indiana Pacers. A lot of Magic fans, I think, did. And it, with the way the schedule set up, this was sort of one of the few times the rest of the season till the very, very end of the season, and who knows what's going on at the end of the season. This was a big test. If the Magic would have been able to get 2 wins, the 4 seed not only feels realistic, it becomes expected. To split them would mean, okay, the Magic are in the running, but to lose both of these games, to have 2 losses to these opponents, not only makes the standings super tight. Magic, as we sit here on Tuesday morning, Magic are half game behind the Knicks for 4th, half game up on Philadelphia for 5th, a game up on Indiana for 6th, game and a half up on Miami for 8th. The Magic could finish anywhere from 4 through 8. And yeah, let's go ahead and say 4 games back at Cleveland for 3rd. It's not going to happen, but it's there. The 2 losses are not the end of the world for the Magic. Let's make that perfectly clear. They are still able and still in control of a lot of their own destiny when it comes to their playoff standing. And because they have a very favorable schedule, they still have the chance to regain control over the 4 seed. New York's still got a West Coast trip coming up. Miami's on a 3-game losing streak. Philadelphia is on the decline. Indiana's Indiana right now. The Magic still very much in control of their own destiny, but obviously beating Washington, beating Charlotte is one thing. Beating a team like Indiana or New York is completely different. And the Magic did not rise to the challenge, to be perfectly frank. They did not step up to the plate. As much pressure as we want to put in these games, Orlando is doing okay in these kind of games. I want to stress this. 2 games do not make a season as much importance as we put on them. But Orlando is 15-22 in games against teams with records above 500. For reference, the Cavs are 16-19. The Knicks are 14-24. The Sixers are 14-19. The Pacers are actually really good in these games, 19-18. The Heat are 14-20. So the Magic's record in games against teams with records above 500, not non-competitive with the rest of their group. What they are really good at is they feast on these bad teams. So that makes Wednesday's game against Brooklyn a must-win because those are the games the Magic typically win and typically dominate. But we do have to take a step back and think about now. How are the Magic going to look in the playoffs? At the end of the day, that's what matters. And playoff performance matters. And their ability to step up in these kinds of games and win these kinds of games against quality opponents, that's ultimately what they're going to be judged on. Their ability to get wins against the bad teams in the league might establish their seeding. But how we view this team and how we view this team moving forward is going to depend on whether they can beat New York, Indiana, Miami, Philadelphia, Cleveland, Milwaukee, whether they can beat these teams in a 7-game series. This is ultimately what's going to matter. So we have to ask ourselves, with everybody in the running now for a spot in that 4-5 matchup, who do the Magic actually want to see in the playoffs? And this is an exercise that is not meant to say that one team is easier than the other. I don't think there is an easy playoff matchup for the Magic. Let me make that perfectly clear. I think every matchup the Magic enter in the postseason this year, they are going to be the underdogs. And they should be. They are completely unproven on that stage. They are completely inexperienced. That inexperience has been showing over the last couple weeks, over these last 2 games especially. They don't know what's going to hit them. And while they have winning records in the season series against New York, all 3 of those games really came with both teams injured. A lot of Knicks fans were celebrating their win over the Magic, and Magic fans were saying we were down key guys. New York says, so were we. It was, look, neither of these teams have faced each other at full strength. We don't know what that looks like. And the Knicks are a very different team with OG Anunoby and Jalen Brunson in the lineup. The Magic have not faced both of them together. And even if you go back to the game in January, the Knicks had a positive plus-minus with OG Anunoby in the lineup, even though Jalen Brunson did not play in that game. So we don't know what it looks like. I do think that Friday's game is very different if Jalen Suggs plays because he's guarding Jalen Brunson. But at the same time, I don't think the Magic are winning that game. The Knicks were very determined to win that game. Orlando was certainly taken aback by the physicality that was put on them. Indiana is another great example. Orlando leads the season series with Indiana. Again, they own the tiebreakers in these situations. Those wins are not unimportant. They are very important. But Orlando owns a 2-1 season series on Indiana. They're done playing each other for the season. But both of those wins came before the Pascal Siakam trade. And we'll get a little bit more in that matchup too, because I do want to note that Pascal Siakam does change a lot of things for that Pacers team. There's no doubt about it. The Magic have faced the Philadelphia 76ers twice already. They'll face them one more time at the end of the season. And much like that Indiana game, that game could have a lot of importance. And Orlando should approach that game the same way New York approached the game on Friday, the same way Indiana approached the game on Sunday, determined to make sure they get a victory against those teams. But having said that, Orlando played the Sixers with Joel Embiid in the second matchup, got crushed. Faced them without Joel Embiid in the first game, got crushed. So there's something that worked there. Miami, obviously, 1-3. One game went to a buzzer beater, went to a last-second shot. Miami worked them the other game. I think we could all agree that's probably the worst matchup the Magic could have. But we have to start thinking about, okay, how do we match up? And even, let's go a little bit deeper. Chicago and Atlanta. How do the Magic match up with those two teams should they have to beat one of them in the play-in tournament to get to the playoffs? Now, I will say this. Chicago's played Orlando very, very tough. And I do have, frankly, some concerns about playing Chicago, even at the Kia Center, in a single elimination game, because DeMar DeRozan's really good. Nikola Vucevic is really good. And that team plays tough defense. And that kind of hints at what I think is the big thing the Magic can struggle with. But I'll say this. I have every confidence the Orlando Magic win a single elimination play-in game to get the 8 seed. And obviously, no one wants to face Boston. Boston's really good. Orlando's been a tough matchup for Boston in the past. I think the Magic would be a tough out against Celtics too, but the Celtics are a juggernaut unto themselves. Avoiding the play-in tournament is a must for the Orlando Magic, in my opinion, but being able to win a 7-8 game, being able to win that elimination game, that is something that I think would ultimately benefit the team. So there's your setup. The regular season matters, of course. It sets up the seeding. It's not unimportant, but we really need to dive in a little bit deeper and think about what kind of matchups the Magic could be successful with in the playoffs. And so we got to ask ourselves that question, and we're going to dive a little bit deeper into that question coming up here in just a moment. But first, it's time for a quick word from our friends over at BetterHelp. Today's podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. Sometimes, look, we all need the opportunity to get something off our chest, whether it's big or small. Certain things can start to get to you, and finding a stress relief, finding something that just lets that stress go is so important. And we got to do it in a constructive way, of course. You don't want to be too over the top. You don't want to do it in a destructive way. And having a friendly ear, having someone who's unbiased in your life to help you diagnose what's really getting to you, what's really bothering you, and giving you constructive ways to handle that, that's what therapy is about. So today I want to say how I really feel about something. And that is frankly just trying to understand things I can't control. That is like one of my big issues sometimes, is learning how to let go of things I can't control. You hear players talk about this all the time. Control what you can control. It's so much easier said than done. I'll say this a lot when people are standings watching and freak about what other teams are doing. Like, don't worry about them. If the Magic take care of their business, they'll be fine. That's great advice for life too. Take care of your business and everything should work out, and you'll have done everything you can to make sure everything works out in the end. Therapy, though, can be different for everyone. Most of us have bigger problems with our favorite sports team. And while there's good analogies in sports, sometimes you need someone that can give you the right insight at the right time. It's important to get things off your chest every once in a while. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be flexible, and suited to your schedule. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. We want to thank you for making Locked On Magic part of your day every day. Don't forget the Locked On Sports Day 24/7 streaming channel is now live on YouTube as well as on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Day is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Day now available on the free Fire TV channels app. So we've set the table here. Talk a little bit about, some of the struggles the Magic have had and how frankly, the biggest concern I think most of us have about the Magic, and I think this is a concern the national media might have and why the Magic haven't quite gotten through to everyone, is nobody knows how this team's going to respond to the playoffs. Nobody knows how this team will step up to the plate. And ultimately, that is the issue. That was the issue this weekend. More than anything else, more than the results. Who cares? The results are important. I'm not going to say who cares about the results. The results are important. But what was concerning about this weekend was just how the Magic struggled to step up to the plate. They lose 2 close games to the Knicks and the Pacers. No one, people will still be upset, but no one's going to be discouraged. What was discouraging about this weekend and about Friday and Sunday's game was it felt like the Magic weren't competitive. That the other teams upped their intensity and the Magic didn't bring it. I think I've said this to a few people, to a few people that I'm in chat rooms with. This Magic team sometimes feels like a house of cards where everything is just very carefully placed. And when something disrupts that, the whole house can collapse. So, you lose Jalen Suggs, suddenly the defense loses some of its intensity, and you see this team kind of collapse a little bit. Caleb Houston, Gary Harris don't provide the same level of intensity, the same level of focus that this team typically needs to win. So what teams are the Magic going to be successful against? You look at, like, let's start there with the team we absolutely do not want to see in a 4-5 playoff series. Like, frankly, as much fun as it would be, as easy as the travel would be for Magic fans that want to go, we could take Brightline down. A Magic Heat series would be really bad for the Orlando Magic. Like, just plain and simple, this is not a good matchup for the Orlando Magic. And it's not just because of the experience factor. We know the Heat turn it on at this time of year, although they've lost their last 3 games. We know that they have another gear that they save for April and they save for March. But more than that, when you watch them play and you watch the 4 matchups that they had with Orlando, it's really about their defense. And it's the same issues that we saw over the last 2 games. The Magic's offense needs space. It needs to be able to create matchups. It needs to be able to get to kind of leverage things in order to be effective. And the Heat, as much as any team in the league, are really good at switching, really good at adapting to what you're doing. They fight like crazy. They double hard. They know exactly what they're doing. And defensively, frankly, among the teams that the Magic could face, and I'll throw Cleveland into this mix too, I think a 3-6 against Cleveland would not turn out well for Orlando, although Orlando does have 2 wins against the Cavs this year. Teams that are able to switch and clog the lane, those are the teams the Magic are going to struggle with, because Orlando's shooting is just too inconsistent. And so much of what Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner are about is getting downhill. So if you have an excellent shot blocker in Bam Adebayo, an excellent shot blocker in Jared Allen, and the Magic are pretty good against shot blockers. It's not like they're terrible against shot blockers. They do well. They've done well against Gobert. They've done well against Nick Claxton, who we'll see on Wednesday. They've done well against Wembanyama. If you have solid veteran shot blockers and size, like Evan Mobley concerns me against Paolo, because he has the size and the mobility to get rid of that advantage. I know Paolo has a 40-point game against the Cavs this year. So he could find a way, and Franz can find a way. But teams that can clog the paint and use size, those are the teams that concern me. Those are the teams that worry me in the playoffs. And so you look at what the Knicks did on Friday. And the Knicks are a team that does, as much as the Magic have had success against them, and I think the Magic would be able to have a competitive series with New York, don't get me wrong. But being able to put a Precious Achiuwa alongside Isaiah Hartenstein, that gives the Knicks the ability to have a foot in the paint, have 2 shot blockers on the floor, and to put size on Paolo Banchero. Ultimately, what a lot of the Magic's offense is working for is, let's create switches so that we have a smaller defender on Paolo. We can dump the ball to him in the post. He can force a double team, and that spurs the passing around the perimeter. That's what the Magic are after on most offensive possessions. Like, how can we switch a smaller player onto Paolo Banchero, put the ball in his hands in the mid post, and then that's gonna force a double and force them into rotations. That's how the Magic force teams into rotations. And I honestly, like, not that Julius Randle's a bad player, and Julius Randle has big scoring games against Orlando too, but we saw in that game in January at the Garden, Julius Randle shot the Knicks out of that game in a lot of ways. And so I think the Knicks are worse having Julius Randle on the floor. Now, we got a very good Precious Achiuwa game on Friday. I'd love to see Precious Achiuwa try that again. But frankly, the thing that also, there are 2 things that concern me in a playoff series. It's teams that can defend with size. So Cleveland, Boston, with Horford and Porzingis, Cleveland, Boston, not so much Milwaukee, New York to some extent, New York in certain matchups, Miami especially. Those are the teams that really, really concern me. The Knicks to some extent do concern me there too, but the other thing that concerns me in a playoff series is having dynamic guards who can just score, beat good defense. And ultimately, that's what the playoffs are about. You can make their lives as hard as possible. But, the Magic can make Jalen Brunson's life really hard. He'll still score 25 and hit big shots. I thought actually early in the game on Friday, Anthony Black played some really strong defense on Brunson, forced him into some really tough shots, and he made them. And I don't think Jalen Suggs would get discouraged by that. Anthony Black definitely did. And that's when Brunson started to attack a lot more. And he sensed that. He sensed that fear. He sensed that disappointment, and he went after it. Donovan Mitchell's the same way. Jimmy Butler is the same way. Having, Tyrese Maxey, has killed the Magic this year. He's the same way. He scored 30 points in the game with Embiid. I think he had a big game as well in that first matchup in November. Those kind of, and every team at this point, at this stage, has those kinds of players. Like Damian Lillard with Milwaukee would scare me in that way, even though I think Orlando would be a really tough matchup for Milwaukee. Again, we've seen them twice this year. The Magic, killed them at the Kia Center early in the season. The second game, I think, was a back-to-back. It was a weird game. Magic got beat pretty handily in that game. So, but it would be interesting. A 2-7 matchup with Milwaukee or 3-6 matchup with Milwaukee. I think the Magic would be able to compete, but Damian Lillard's the X factor. Jalen Brunson, Donovan Mitchell, those are the X factors. So what kind of matchups are the Magic going to be successful with? Teams that aren't strong defensively, teams that don't have the size to match up with what the Magic are trying to do, and teams that are frankly a little inconsistent with their shooting and with their attention to detail. Now, there are not a lot of those teams in the playoffs. The Magic are the newbies. Every team in the current Eastern Conference playoff picture has some type of postseason experience, except for Indiana. But even Indiana. Orlando's the newbies. They don't know what they don't know. They're the new kids on the block. But if you have to ask me, I do think Indiana is the best matchup for Orlando, because I think even Indiana understands their fast break style doesn't translate very well to the playoffs. That when they get into a playoff series, they're going to have to be able to execute into half court. And I think Orlando, as much as any team in the league, has done a really good job forcing the Pacers to a half court setting, to play a half court game. And so I do like Orlando's chances against Indiana. Having said that, I'm sure Indiana's saying the same thing again about Orlando. In fact, I would honestly argue most teams in the playoff picture, even like Philadelphia, they're all going to argue Orlando is their best out. And it's not because Orlando are their best chance. And it's not because Orlando won't be difficult to face and won't present challenges. It's because they're inexperienced. They've never been through the playoffs, so they don't know the attention to detail that it takes. And while their defense is very tough, most teams are going to feel like they're going to be able to shut down Orlando's offense. Like we remember 2019, Orlando got the one game against Toronto, but the rest of that series, Nikola Vucevic could not do anything. And just like 2019, 2020, those were two very one-dimensional teams, excellent defensive teams, terrible offensive teams. And yeah, the Magic got a game, but Milwaukee bet that Gary Clark wasn't going to make 4 threes again. Toronto bet that DJ Augustin couldn't make that shot again, or whatever happened that game wasn't going to happen again. I think a lot of teams probably look at Orlando and say, that's a team, yeah, they might get one on us, but they're not going to be able to sustain any type of offense against our defense as it gets better, especially later in the series. They're not going to be able to sustain that offense throughout the whole thing. So I honestly, we can have this conversation. And again, this is no offense to Indiana. Indiana's a very good team. They're a very tough team. They worked Orlando on Sunday night. That's still my most favorable matchup, because I do think Orlando, they've had a lot of success slowing that team down. They've had they had some success attacking them. They're not a strong defensive team, even though they played their best defensive game of the season on Sunday. That's a team that I think Orlando can pick apart and compete with, because they're not going to load up on them defensively as effectively as some of the other teams. And yes, they have Pascal Siakam now, but they're not as, I think losing Buddy Hield is a big loss for them. If the Magic do end up in a 4-5 matchup with Indiana, or even a 7-8 play-in at Kia Center, I do think Orlando, I do think that would be the most favorable matchup for the Magic. But again, like I said, I'm betting, if you talk to my pal Tony East on Locked On Pacers, I'm betting he's saying the same thing. I'm betting that they're saying the same thing. It's like, hey, I know Orlando's been a struggle for us. Their size is tough. They defend really hard. But out of all the teams in the Eastern Conference playoff picture, that's the one you want to get because they don't know what they're doing. And again, I think this weekend showed that a little bit. And so hopefully that lesson is learned. We'll talk about what the Magic did on their maintenance day. Some good things that Wendell Carter is doing in the community. We'll shine a light on that coming up here in just a moment. But first, it's time for a quick word from our friends over at Nissan. Are you the kind of driver who likes to push things a little further? Ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner? Well, our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventure to the next level. The 2024 Nissan Rogue is perfect for city drives and great escapes with class exclusive Google built-in, your always updating assistant to call on for almost anything. Gone are the days of connecting your phone. Google Assistant, Google Maps, and Google Play Store are built right into the 12.3-inch HD touchscreen infotainment system. The 2024 Rogue is the perfect midsize crossover for your next adventure. Nissan's incredible lineup also includes the 2024 Nissan Armada. It's going to change what you expect from a full-size SUV. Picture a rugged 4x4 that can seat up to 8 in first-class luxury and style. Tow bigger and explore further in the 2024 Armada. Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure at shopnissanusa.com. So the Orlando Magic had a maintenance day on Monday, day off. Very, very needed. I do think, unfortunately, no excuses. I do think the Magic were a little bit worn down by the heavy schedule over the last couple of weeks. So getting a couple of days off before this really nice long homestand that's coming up, 9 of the next 11, 9 of the next 10 now at the Kia Center, including the 8-game homestand, which begins Sunday against Toronto. So the Magic going to need a lot of energy, going to be feeling the energy. They're going to pick up pace here. I am fairly confident the Magic will avoid the play-in tournament. I am fairly confident they will be in that 4-5 series. I don't know if they'll get the 4 seed, but 5 or 6 feels very, very likely with their schedule coming up. Again, they just got to take care of their business. And Wednesday's obviously going to be a huge test. Brooklyn is playing a lot better than they were a couple weeks ago when we saw them last, although they lost to Charlotte. Brooklyn's a weird team. Let's just leave it at that. Brooklyn's a weird team. They're going to be looking for some blood because Orlando shut them down pretty heavily in that game a couple weeks ago. So we'll see what the Magic have in store for them. It's a game where they got to get right, and it's not an easy game. Brooklyn will be a challenge for them, but it's a game the Magic have to get themselves right and kind of find that secret sauce and that offense and that flow again that they missed over the weekend. Hopefully, a chance to recover physically. We saw if you follow Arnie Kander on Instagram, Cole Anthony did the cold plunge in the pool at the Van Hill Training Center. I don't know how old that video is. Arnie can post videos kind of late. But everyone's getting themselves ready and obviously ready for a stretch run. And Orlando's gonna have a lot of time at home, which should leave them pretty refreshed. But I loved what what Cole Anthony said after the game Sunday. The winning made everyone a little comfortable. They got knocked back a little bit. So Monday is a chance to reset things. And one of the ways that guys reset things is through their philanthropic work. And I haven't had a chance to go to a lot of the events that players do throughout the calendar year, but I did get to go to Wendell Carter's event on Monday at Top Golf Orlando. And it was a really great event. He had some kids out, treated them to time at Top Golf, which is fantastic, and announced a really fantastic partnership that he's doing, where he is helping establish a teaching curriculum to help kind of teach high school students at Evans High School and Oak Ridge High School about the aviation industry and how to be pilots. And it's a really, really cool program. Obviously, people of color are not very well represented in the airline industry, and that's something that a lot of people in the industry are trying to fix, and being able to introduce them to this program, through this curriculum is really fantastic. Wendell Carter, through the Carter Family Foundation, has done some great work injecting funding for STEM labs inside Evans High School, which is traditionally a minority school here in Central Florida. Does some great work mentoring students. He has a Christmas event where he speaks to students, and Wendell Carter's always been about that kind of mentorship. I mean, we see it on the floor. Like, he said, I'm 25, and sometimes I feel like I'm older on the court. Wendell Carter is one of the true leaders on this team. And I know he's kind of the Rorschach test for a lot of people. His composure, his demeanor, the fact that he is very stoic on the floor, I think that is a calming presence for the team. And he brings that seriousness to just about everything he does. They said at the event, he is very modest. He is indeed very, very modest. He has done some incredible work. And, it was funny talking to his mom about why this program. And, she said, when Wendell was little, he wanted to be a pilot. And when he hit that growth spurt, got to 6'5", they're like, no, dude, you can't be a pilot. You're too big. This is a way to keep paying it forward and to help open up a new career path. It's so much is about representation and being able to see someone like you doing something. Obviously Wendell can't be a pilot, but everyone sees basketball players. To see him put his face and put his name to this kind of program, I think is fantastic. And I want to send a shout out to everyone at the Carter Family Foundation. I want to send a shout out to Wendell Carter and Platform Squared for doing such great work in our community. And Wendell Carter won the Rich and Helen DeVos Community Enrichment Award last year. Cole Anthony won it this year. Cole did show up at Topgolf and was very Cole Anthony. But everyone needs to work on their golf swings. I will add that as well. It's always good to see athletes struggle with something that you're okay at and that makes you feel a little bit better as an athlete. So that I want to appreciate Wendell and Cole for making me feel a little bit more athletic than I am today. But they all do such great work in the community, and I don't often get the chance to highlight that, and I want to make sure that I highlight that today. But that's going to do it for me today. I want to thank you all again for listening to today's episode of Locked On Magic. Of course, find me on Twitter at PhilipRR_OMD. Subscribe to the podcast and Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Himalaya, Google Play, Spotify, Odyssey, and all the fun ways to know podcasts to your podcast-enabled listening device. For the latest on the Orlando Magic, be sure to check out OrlandoMagicDaily.com. You can find us there on Twitter at OMagicDaily. And be sure to check out my Patreon page, the Orlando Magic Hub. You can check that out at patreon.com/Orlando Magic Hub for extra content as well on the Orlando Magic. And of course, I truly appreciate your support as we go through the rest of the season. I am planning to I have one more road trip planned later this year. That's already booked. And I'm also planning to travel for the playoffs. And so my ability to do that does unfortunately depend a little bit on your support. So I do appreciate those who do support me so I can give you the best Magic coverage you can. And of course, if you subscribe to Patreon, just tell me what kind of content you want as well. That I really do appreciate that. And I want to provide the best conversation I can with you guys as well. So I appreciate all of that. Now that you're listening to us, though, be sure to check out the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel. You can find that on YouTube and on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts who know their teams best, and our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. That's going to do it for me today. I want to thank you all again for listening to today's episode of Locked On Magic for Orlando Magic Daily and Locked On Magic. This has been Philip Rossman-Reich. We'll see you all again next time for another episode of Locked On Magic.